Everybody knows that you have to have a strong why, but are you using whys wrong? We're going to show you today how to use the power of why the right way to grow your business right here, right now. It's On Air Brands.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the On Air Brands show. I am your host, Todd Genatasio, alongside my co-host, Amber Furman today. What's going on, Amber?
What's up? I always have to pay super close attention to when this pops on the screen because I'm afraid people are going to catch me jamming out to the intro music. I gotta calm myself down.
Is the intro music on your hype playlist on Spotify that everyone should be subscribed to?
It's definitely getting to the point where, like, you definitely get out of bed, right? Like, gotta go.
Yeah, and for everybody,
it's catchy.
Amber does something cool on her show where at the end of her show, More Than Corporate, she asks her guests what their favorite hype feel-good song is, and then she has a Spotify playlist of all these feel-good songs suggested by the guests. What's the name of that playlist for people to get it?
The More Than Corporate playlist, and reach out to me if you want it because it's actually not a public playlist.
Oh,
it is
that?
Exclusive, right?
Exclusive offer for you guys.
Yes. And it's interesting because I started telling guests afterwards. Like, originally I wouldn't tell them what the purpose was. And then I started to tell somebody the purpose and then they changed their answer. So now I ask them and then I tell them afterwards, just so you know, now it's locked in. This is going on my playlist, right? You can't change it.
Yeah.
So there's everything on there from like classical music to like hardcore rap, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you just said once they knew the reason why you were asking, their answers changed. So today we're talking about the power of why, how to answer that question for yourself. Very popular conversation is Start With Why by Simon Sinek, his famous TED Talk that's been viewed 10 gazillion times by everybody and everybody loves it. I'm actually not a huge fan because I think it is detrimental in becoming self-centered with your decision-making. I think that Simon, the way he talks about having a why is super important for your own drive and passion and to get through the hard days, right? Knowing why you do something is the number one reason you get out of bed in the morning. And in that same exact reason, it's why you get out of bed. Your why is why you get out of bed. Your audience's why is why they get out of bed. And so I think if you follow Simon Sinek and you start with your why and you lead with your why, it's not going to connect with the people you're trying to connect with because they don't care. They need to know why they should pay attention, right?
Yeah, I'm flashing back to the TED Talk because I love his concept as well. And when he talks about why, I was obsessed with it too.
When I first saw it, however many years ago, I watched it like a dozen times in a row. It was super inspiring. And now that I've started learning more about, messaging and communication and connection, I started realizing you really need to lead with, one of my values is customer centric. And so, you need to start with what's in it for them, your customers' why.
Yeah, Simon talks in that TED Talk about, why do you get out of bed in the morning and why should anyone care? I think what happens is when you have that and in there, we kind of stop listening and we're like, okay, let me answer the first question and then we'll get to the second question. When the reality is like, you need to know your why. And then you need to communicate why anybody should care, right? Yeah. And I know that you had some really cool examples of situations where you were drawn into something and other situations where you weren't, although their content was just as good. You just weren't drawn in because they focused on their why instead of why you should care.
Yeah. So you want to talk about the power of why and why is important, right? The benefits of having a strong why. And then that can give some context of what we're breaking down.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to take this back just a little bit and switch gears for people who hear the word why and think emotion. So I want to take this out of the emotional context for just a second and talk about like any business negotiation that you've ever been in. And when you think about this, you've got two people that are presumably in different spots of the things that are going to make sense to them. And you have to get them to this common intent, right? So if you think of all the possible things that you like to do with your life and the different directions your life could go, I use the same strategy for figuring out which one of those paths I should take. What's the common intent between the things that I like to do? I did a Facebook post recently, and Todd, you and I were talking about this in the pre-show, where I love the restaurant industry. I love being an attorney, and I love the coaching business. And those things seem completely different until you bring them up to that common intent and you realize that the why for all of those, the purpose for all of those are the same. And it's, transformation, impact, and being able to create an experience. So when you know that that's your why, then you start to fill your days with activities that fulfill that why for you. And you're able to fulfill other people's whys through attaching yours to their purpose as well. So understanding your why is so important, because otherwise it seems like you're bouncing from one activity to the next with no real rhyme or reason, when deep down there is a rhyme or reason. You just haven't understood it yet.
Yeah. And I do think for people to understand your purpose and drive can be critical in their decision-making process to doing business with you. But that's not the first thing they need to know, right? The first thing they need to know is what's in it for me and why should I care? Then once they've gone through the first few layers of communication and they start considering doing business with you, listening to you, or versus someone else, then that's where the connection between your purpose will come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. Helping people understand that there's something in it for them, allowing them to have the problem that you solving the problem that they have. We talk in the marketing world all the time of solving the problem, like speaking to the problem that your clients think they have, and then solving the problem they actually have, because they're never the same. This is exactly what we're talking about with, your why and your purpose. If you have to help somebody understand why they should listen first. Otherwise, the reason you're doing it doesn't matter to them.
Exactly. And it's like most entrepreneurs and business owners have gone out and started their business because they wanted freedom of some kind, right? Freedom to make an impact and probably have a skill set that's marketable, that they can sell, right? Or products or product idea that they can sell. But if your business why for you get up in the morning because you want to create freedom and impact, but that's not what your customers are trying to do, it doesn't make a difference. So an example, I have, one of my friends owns an animation company. They make those, 2-minute animations for software companies and stuff like that. And his why for having that type of business, he has a fully remote team of subcontractors. He has super freedom. He actually, a couple years ago, sold 95% of all of his stuff and lived on the road in Airbnbs for a year all over the country. Super cool. But his why for that company was to be able to use his skill set to make money and create a freedom of time and location independence. Now, if he were to go out and his marketing material was about him wanting freedom and time and location independence, do you think that the VP of marketing at a $30 million software company really cares about that? That's not going to connect with them, right? His why that he needs to talk about is your message and software is very complicated to explain. And it's really easy to communicate that when you have a 2-minute animation that simplifies your message, right? That's the why that the VP of marketing cares about at these large companies. They don't care that Mike wanted to go and create a lifestyle business so he could work on the road, right? Like, those are two very different things. But Mike having the why of building that business for that freedom is what can help him keep driven when times get hard and you have to dig into your passion to get through the tough days.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I recently had an experience that's just falling straight into what we're talking about. And that is, I started telling somebody, I was on a call with them. They had signed up for, a program that I had coming up. And I started telling them about this whole restaurant love and the experiences that we had just talked about. And they said, now I want to go to your mastermind more because I know that the tiny amount of details. And they went into why it mattered to them. But I couldn't have that conversation with them until they had already decided that they had a problem that I could solve, which I think is, our why, and this is really what we're getting to the heart of today. Our why will help somebody understand, are we the person that they know, like, and trust? Mm-hmm. Of all the million people that are out there that could solve the problem that they have now identified, are we in alignment with the person they're looking for? And that's where your why really kind of creates that rapport that causes them to jump in and buy.
Mm-hmm. And so when we start talking, our audience, we're talking about creating shows and podcasts and content and stuff. And so when it comes to having a why for your show overall and your individual episodes, it's not about why you started the show. It's about why should they listen, right? When they open the episode, when they start listening, why should I keep listening? Or when they see the description of the episode, why should they press play on this episode? And then overall, why should they subscribe to the show? So can you give some tips for creating a good why that will make a difference?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I try to do this with my episodes, I'm not always successful, but I try, is thinking, what do you actually want your listener to get out of that? Like, if you were listening to this podcast, mm-hmm. What would you want them to feel? What would you want them to think? What would you want them to be imagining at the end of your show? And then how do you create that in alignment with the purpose that you have defined as, your show? We have a target audience that, you should have a target audience. You should have an avatar. You should know exactly who you're talking to every single day. So being able to put yourself in the mindset of that person to say, okay, what do I need to say to make them think, feel, hear, and experience this when I'm done? And then build your content that way.
I love that. I always go back to the example when creating content, especially written content, is think of it like you're writing an email. If you're writing a blog post or social post, think of it like you're just sending a message, sending an email to someone who asked you a question. And that is an easy way to get over the mental hurdle. And one of my clients this week told me he does videos on Instagram. What he actually did when he recorded to switch to be more personal, or to feel more personal with the people he's trying to talk to, he actually recorded his video and said the person's name that he was thinking of, like if it was, he was sending it to a guy named Dave or whatever. It was like, hey, Dave, making this video today because I know you're thinking about blah, blah, or whatever it was. And then he obviously edited out that first part when he said the guy's name. And then the rest of it became what was his Instagram video. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
That's really interesting. And I think that that's super important to also narrow down that I think a huge mistake that people make when they start a show or start creating their avatar is believing that if you're speaking to one person, that means you're excluding everyone else. And so you try to create this content that talks to everybody's whys and everybody's purposes all the time. And this is where, one of the most important things I ever heard when it came to content creation is not everybody's going to catch every episode you do. So when you feel like you're repeating yourself, you're going to get something in there that somebody's going to resonate with that they didn't resonate with before, or maybe you're going to get somebody who didn't hear it. On that similar concept, not every person is meant to hear every part of your message. And so being able to say, okay, my avatar may have multiple different segments in it. So who am I actually speaking to with this episode? And that's completely okay. You're not excluding everybody else, but you're talking to that one particular type of person.
Yeah. And when you nail a why, you get comments like this. Jim Pelley in the comments today for the live show on Facebook. Hey, Todd G, your show at noon Wednesdays are always so valuable. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you, Jim, for tuning in, man. I really appreciate you. Appreciate all of our listeners. But when you have a mission and an avatar, like Amber just said, and the whys that your customers need to hear, you're able to create something that adds value. And I'm grateful to be able to do that, Jim. So thanks for chiming in. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Rob, for bringing that to my attention. But this is key with having these whys, and everything you just said, Amber, makes total sense. And, when it comes to mistakes, I mean, we kind of danced around a few different mistakes, but, knowing what you know from the neuro-linguistic programming side of things, what are some mistakes you see people make when they're coming up with their whys? And actually, let's break this down into two things, because I do find it valuable. Like, you already talked about the not using the word why, but using the word purpose to keep yourself driven. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some important tips for success and mistakes to avoid when it comes to the purpose you need to have for yourself. And then let's see how that plays into the creating your purpose and why for your audience.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to talk really quickly about the purpose and why situation for answering this question, because our brain runs on stories. We need them. And just as much as your brain runs on stories to understand your why, somebody else's brain runs on stories to understand not only their why, but why they should be listening. So if you don't tell them why they should be listening, they're going to create their own story, right? So too many times people talk about, hey, look at this product. Look what it can do. It can send, this many Facebook messages at a time. It can send this many emails, like whatever it is that you're doing. You talk about the concepts of it because you already know everything before that. Mm-hmm. So the bullet points make sense to you. But you're talking to somebody who doesn't know what you know. And I'm going to switch gears for just a second into the legal world, because I tell every one of the people that I prep for the witness stand this, like, everything about your life. Everything about your product. You're talking to a judge, you're talking to a client, you're talking to somebody who doesn't know everything that you know. And too many times we skip over all that important stuff because we're like, oh, they must know it because I do.
Yeah.
And so we go back and when we get down to the really small pieces of information that would create that why for someone, we feel like we're talking down to them, or we're condescending, or we're repeating information that they must already know. And what's the phrase? If you can teach it to a 6th grade or a 6-year-old or a 6th grader, like, that's what people need, because not everybody connects dots the same way you do.
Yeah. So, and it's like trying to teach, algebra to someone who doesn't know addition or subtraction yet. You have to give them the building blocks to get up to where you're at.
Yeah. And most importantly is, like, we have this idea that we've learned something once, and so we know it and we don't need to learn it again. And for some reason, like, that's the way that our minds work. I already know that, right? Mm-hmm. One of the first things that was ever said to me when I started this journey is that the 4 most dangerous words in the English language are, I already know that. Because you miss out on so much that you don't actually know because you're not listening. Yeah. So I took that and switched it as a podcaster, as a content creator, as a service provider. I think that the 4 most dangerous words in the English language are, they already know that. When you assume that, you've lost the game.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. And I think when we look at that thinking, I already know that, or they already know that, is when we hear those things, or when we feel that way, we dismiss whatever's next. But and that's the importance of drawing people in first with a strong why, right? Is that when you start with why they should pay attention and what's in it for them, you can draw them in and get their attention, and then they have context for what it is you're providing, and you're going to give it a little different twist or perspective than what they may have already heard. But because they're drawn in and engaged, as you then go into something they thought they already knew, they're more likely to pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from an NLP standpoint, we are always expanding. We're always expanding the way that we see the world through the experiences that we have. Mm-hmm. And so this is why we read books multiple times. I was just talking to somebody at the dog park this morning about the fact that I read How to Win Friends and Influence People every single year.
Yeah.
because you're a different person every year when you read that book, right? So the person you're talking to, maybe you haven't communicated with them for 3, 4, 6 months. Maybe they have gone through some life-changing experience in the past couple of months, and now they're hearing or seeing your content in a completely different way. You have no way of knowing that. So if it makes you feel better, you can pre-frame these conversations by saying, hey, I know some of this may seem a little bit basic, and it's super important that we start with a good foundation. So let me tell you why this is important.
Yeah, yeah. Just I think providing context, or even telling them I'm going to be providing context. And like I had a professor in college. I think it was a music 101 class that I take or something. And he would say that you never hear the same song twice.
Yep.
And it was exactly what you're saying, because you are a different person every time you hear the song or every time you read the book. Even Eric, on the PodMax show this morning, make sure you guys are subscribed to that for more news, trends, tips, and insights on the podcasting industry. He was talking about how he journals in the morning and at night, and sometimes it would seem like two different people. When he looks back, he said he does audio journaling, which I actually want to talk to him about. That seems super interesting. But he said it sounds like two totally different people, two different people's messages from what was in the morning and what his perspective and everything at night. So even the same person. And I think that's, we could have a whole episode on repurposing and resharing, repromoting the same content or the same message over and over, because there's a lot of different reasons to do it. This being one of them. Every time someone hears something, they're in a different state of mind. They're in a different, they've learned something, they've forgotten something. They're sitting in a different room. One time it was loud, one time it wasn't. One time they were super engaged, one time they were super distracted. And so it is important to just reinforce messages that you want to make sure you're getting across.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this isn't a sales conversation, but just to really drop that seed that this is why it's so important to hear that no and then go back and have those conversations, because the person who told you no 2 or 3 days ago may not be the same person that you're talking to now. Right. The person who heard that information 2 or 3 days ago isn't the same person that's hearing information now. One of the things we talk about in the NLP world so much is that people think that change is hard. People think that change takes time. Change happens in an instant. It's deciding to change that takes time. So the moment that you actually decide to make that change, and it can be at any point in time throughout the day, you're a different person.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we talked about some examples coming up that we're going to talk about. I said, one of my friends, the entrepreneurial journey, I think, is a good example where we have our own whys for leaving corporate, going out on our own and doing things. And that doesn't always mean that our audience is going to care about that. The same example, I'm currently judging an entrepreneur competition for Stevens Tech here in Hoboken, New Jersey. And last night I had to watch 15 different 3-minute pitches of these students who have their projects, right? And some of them had really great stories and whys, and right at like the immediate hook, like the video, you hit play and the girl was super passionate. You felt the energy come through, and it really connected that, one, this really mattered to her, but also the story she told was why it should matter to me. And then there's other people who started off their video pitches by saying, hey, I'm Todd. I'm a senior at Stevens Tech, and this is our project for the semester. My teammates so-and-so and so-and-so. And so here we're going. All right, we're 20 seconds in, and I don't know why I should keep paying attention.
Yeah, and we don't have that long of an attention span.
Yeah.
Like if you don't capture somebody's attention, especially in, this day and age, if you are in an actual conference and that person is like in a physical, location with you, then they're going to weave in and out, and you might have another opportunity to capture their why. But in a virtual setting or a podcast setting, if you don't capture their why, they're not coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. You're totally right. And how easy is it, even if it is live, if I'm not captured and engaged, for me to just pick up my phone, I'm watching the computer, pick up my phone and start scrolling through. I'm like, yeah, the video's playing. It's kind of osmosis getting into my head, but I'm not engaged and paying attention. And so the message is not going to sink in and capture me and create the whole framing that, the producer or publishers, it really wants when they're trying to connect with their audience.
Yeah, agreed. And this is why it's so important to weave that why throughout your presentation. You give that big why in the beginning of why they should listen to the whole episode. But as you change concepts, why should they keep listening? Or why should somebody who tuned out tune back in if it's because I know that everybody that's listening to this right now has had that experience where something's playing in the background and you hear something and you're like, holy crap, what did I just miss? And sometimes you'll go back and listen to the whole episode because you're like, I don't know whether this was just right here or did I miss something valuable before that? So weaving that in and out is so important for that tune out because we think we can multitask. We can't multitask. And so we're in and out of consciousness when we're listening to something all the time.
Yeah. I mean, even when I'm just like doing the dishes, listening to podcasts, right? And it's like, I'm not doing it like my mind is not getting focused on the dishes. I'm still listening, but I just kind of zone out a little bit. And I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. Let me hit the 15-second back button and re-catch what was said and then go back. Right. But it is, like you said, to make sure you keep reinforcing, hey, this is important. This is why it matters to you.
Yeah. I mean, I know that every parent out there right now will understand this. My mom and I laugh so much because now that, you know, I'm in my 30s and we have this amazing relationship and I'm going down this personal development path and I'll hear something and I'll be like, holy crap, this is amazing. And I'll share it with my mom. She'll be like, I've been telling you that since you were a kid. And I'm like, well, you weren't the right messenger and it wasn't the right time, right?
Yeah,
and clearly you didn't tell me why I should listen. But you know, every parent that's listening to this right now understands this statement. You've had this conversation with your kids where you tell them something until they're blue in the face and they're like, this doesn't matter. And then they go hang out with their friends and their friend says something the exact same. And they're like, hey, it matters, right? The way you say it, the messenger, who you are, and the state of mind they're in all matters. And it's got to be weaved in throughout every part of your show.
It all matters. And it also comes down to what kind of relationship you have with the person receiving the message. A parent has a totally, like you said, totally different context and angle just because of the messenger it's coming from. I had an old client and also a mentor of mine at the same time. When my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, he was, you know, talking to me about, you know, parenting and being a dad and was giving me advice more for down the road when they're older. But he said, if you want to be, and this carries over into business marketing, everything in life. He said, if you want to help, you know, be a role model for your kids and lead them and help them become great people, if you need to be able to influence their decision making. And if you want to influence someone, you have to have access to them. And sometimes teenagers just don't give access to their parents, right? Like that's just what it is. And sometimes people scrolling through their Facebook feed or through their podcast feed don't give you access because the title of your episode didn't catch them in, or the description that they didn't see what's in it for me. Why should I listen? Right. And that's the power of the why, is to get you the initial access and then reinforcing the why so that you can have the influence that you're looking to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're going to have to dig into this on another episode because this is so powerful. But, you know, when we talk about brands, whether we're talking about the brand of your company or the brand of your show or whatever it is, your brand isn't what you think it is. Right. It's what your client thinks that it is. Right. And so if you're not putting that why in their terms, then they're not actually seeing the brand you want them to see. And so being able to do that is so important, or else you're saying something and they're hearing something completely different.
Yeah, totally. It's giving them the category and ways to think about you, right? And you can either do it unintentionally and hope for the best, and people are just going to make it up, and then you're going to have, if you reach 1,000 people, you're going to have 1,000 different brand feelings out there, right? Everybody has a different thing. Or if you tell them why it's important for them, and then you lead into what your purpose is, then they can start categorizing you in their brain and understand how they should think about your brand and what they should connect it with emotionally and those kind of things. And that's the power of it, right?
Yeah. Like, think of it this way. So I had a conversation with somebody about 7-8 months ago where we were talking about my success architect title. And I said, I branded myself as a success architect. And they said, who knows that? And I said, well, the people that I've told, which are the people close to me. And he says, none of your stuff that you're putting out on social media screams success architect. None of it. So you haven't branded yourself as that. You've just called yourself that. Like, it's a completely different thing, right? And so when we're talking about this in the context of why, you know, your why may be incredibly personal to you. But if you're not saying that, if you're not, you know, putting that out in a way that somebody else can see it, you're not actually branding your company with that why. You're just saying it in a way they don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So not just coming up with your why and coming up with a reason that your audience should care, right? And why they should care, but making sure you communicate it clearly and consistently so that people understand it and make that connection for you. And the more consistent you are with sharing why they should care about you and why they should pay attention, Donald Miller is a brilliant marketing mind. Story Brand is his books, Business Made Simple, Marketing Made Simple, Story Brand. All of them should be must reads for everybody in business. But
Yes.
he talks about marketing is an exercise in memorization, and that you want people to be able to easily recite what your message is. And I think that's like what we're getting here is when you can be consistent about why people should pay attention to you and they're able to remember that is, that's what connects the power of why of your audience to the power of why for you and the power of your brand all together, so that you can, grow a successful business and show on the fundamentals of these communication strategies that are really what make the biggest difference. If you don't take the time to sit down and think, why should people care about this? What's in it for them? Why am I driven to get up every day and do this work and make this impact? Then you're building a house of cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all want to think that we are not selfish people because, we've been raised to know that selfishness is bad. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is our unconscious mind is incredibly selfish.
Yeah.
So, we can pretend that we care about other people and your why all you want to. The thing that actually makes decisions, the thing that makes buying decisions, the thing that controls where your focus goes, needs to know why it should care first. It's incredibly selfish.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think we really tackled this subject. A lot of great value in here. Make sure you guys listening get the show notes over at onairbrands.com/show. And if you are friends with anybody who would see value in this conversation about how to create your why so that it connects with your audience and how to communicate that, please share this episode with them and make sure that you're subscribed on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And you can also subscribe via email at onairbrands.com/show. That's also got all the podcast links there. And you can get episode notes here. And make sure you also check out Amber's other podcast at morethancorporate.com. Until next week, we will catch you guys on the next episode.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brand